to get our next speaker, I've got to stop letting these Kiwis in. I don't know why we do it. Courtney Hopkinson is a beautiful man. He's a 3D illustrator and animator originally from Matamata. Did I say that right? Yeah. In rural New Zealand. Courtney confesses that he has a passion for chocolate and ice cream, and it can only be matched by client briefs to illustrate them both. Courtney also has a much-loved Boston Terrier. He is an absolute genius. He was kind enough to design and model the 3D captain of mine. It's time to get him up here. Get your hands out. Bang them together for Courtney Hopkinson.
Kia ora. My name's Courtney. I'm from New Zealand originally. I've been in Melbourne since 2010. It's pretty awesome. Totes recommend. I'm here today to talk about Zbrush and how I use it in my work. It's a bit of a weird piece of software, and I hear a lot of people who want to get into it, but they just don't quite make the jump. I'm going to try to convince you to do that today and move away from maybe more traditional workflows into the more fun and illustrative nature of Zbrush. First, a bit about my background. I work with a group called Watermark. We're a collective of artists and illustrators based in New Zealand and Australia. We mostly create still images for advertising, packaging, branding, design, as well as some animations, and we're starting work in the VR, AR space. I'm the lone artist here in Melbourne, but we're all in constant contact with each other, so it's a great community to come up in. There's 25 of us at the moment. Clients can contact us all directly, which is cool, but if you want, you can contact directors to produce larger projects. We're all independent artists, so there's a real sense of autonomy that we have. I can do what I want. I just got to do the certain paperwork stuff with Watermark, and they'll protect my ass if weird stuff happens with jobs. We've all got different styles, use different tools, and we come together to collaborate and work on larger projects together. I'm always getting blown away by the cool work that's getting done by other people in Watermark. I'll occasionally pick up the phone and talk to people, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm working on this crazy stuff." I'm like, "Wow, what the hell's going on?" Yeah, it's really helped to develop and push me to become a better illustrator. So I work mostly in stills, and I do a lot of 3D advertising work. I tried to get into Lightwave when I was learning. I was studying at Massey in Wellington, but the interface is really kind of dry and text heavy, and it wasn't until mid-2000s that I picked up Cinema 4D, which had a much more user-friendly interface, and it felt more like Photoshop, which was my main tool, and so I was just more able to pick it up and develop a realistic style for illustration work for stills. It was really affordable too, because it had the separate modules at the time. Around the same time, I also picked up Zbrush. It took me a little longer to get into, but the payoff has been amazing. I use it to solve a lot of modeling weird challenges that come up. Let's have a logo that's like an Easter egg with unfurling wrapper. It's how do I do this in cinema? How am I going to do it at all? I just go into Zbrush and stuff happens naturally. Where Zbrush really shines is creating 3D characters. It's the industry standard, but I just find it really free and flowing compared to a traditional poly modeling workflow. Here are some of my 3D characters. I've got to give a shout out to Kate Moon, who did the character design of the dude with the yellow shirt. She's an awesome Melbourne artist. The little character in the red ute was designed by a Watermark artist by the name of Simon Shaw, and that's Rich McCaw down the bottom right. I don't know if any Australians would recognise him. These characters were all designed by a 2D artist based in Adelaide who works with Watermark called David Follett. I collaborate with him often, and I'm just so excited to work with his designs. They just jump off the screen. They're full of character and energy and humour. And my task as a 3D artist is try to translate and bring that character into 3D form and not lose it along that process of translation. Here's one of my first client-driven 3D projects from back in 2007. This is for Bluebird Chips in New Zealand. It's an iconic New Zealand brand, and at the time their penguin character was quite tired, and they wanted to bring it up to the same level of finish as the 3D penguin movies that were big at the time, Surf's Up and Happy Feet. For some reason, penguins were just massive for a minute. Yeah, it hasn't happened since. But they really wanted the 3D feathers, which was really possible with the Cinema 4D hair module at the time, which was a separate module. I collaborated on this with Philip Small and Jared Taylor, who were watermark artists. And we had a few weeks to model and texture the character and output 6 poses. So for this character, I had to polymodel it, which is drawing points over a sketch of an A pose, and then pulling those points together, creating polygons across those points, putting those polygons into a subdivision, deformer, and then slowly this penguin takes shape. The problem with that is that it's really dry and technical, and while you're creating the character and trying to find the character forms in 3D, it's you're dealing with the topology at the same time, so you're kind of trying to balance these two thoughts while you're creating, and it slows you down and muddies my brain anyway. So this character ended up getting rigged in cinema with a quick and dirty rig, and then I had to do a lot of fixing in Zbrush, and that's what I did for that one. Yeah, so here's the Dryballs polymodeling process. A lot of pushing and pulling, selecting, moving. And this is really fast, but because it's sped up, but it's not very fun. It's the kind of thing that's really good for watching The Office at work, but so slowly the character takes shape. But another thing is that if there's client feedback, it's quite hard to change. This is a really basic rig. I'm not a fancy rigger. And this is for stills work too, so it has to end up really high res and detailed, but it doesn't have to be properly animated, so I get away with that. I get away with a lot because of that. So here it is getting posed in cinema, and it's just a little bit more, it's pretty awkward. And also my rigging skills means there's bad deformations around the shoulders. Straight away in ZBrush, things speed up. You've got more direct control, and you can see how I'm able to match the visual exactly. You're working directly on the character. So with the polymodeling, you're kind of creating points, and here's the character down here. It's like a puppet, whereas with ZBrush, you're much more hands-on. You're working directly on the character, and it just feels so much more natural. There's no gap between what you're doing and what you're creating. There's a hell of a lot of Photoshop retouching on this because of the underlying issues with the skin. So, at any stage, the client could come back with big changes. And it meant, with that linear process, it meant a lot of going back to square 1 or 2 and then trying to catch up again. So fast forward to today. This is a character designed by an artist in Thailand called Gop Gap. I asked him if I could 3Dize one of his Instagram characters, and he said yes, which was great. And this was way more ZBrush focused and a lot more fun. So this is the creation of a base mesh in ZBrush using Z-spheres. They're really quick for creating the nutting out the base proportions of the character. So you got the base mesh, that's probably 15 to 20 minutes, if that, maybe 10. It's crazy fast. And then that's just for the base mesh. You're not thinking about topology. You can see polygons, but you're not thinking about it. Staying push and pull, find the character, all the time working in the round, rotating the character, trying to make it work from all viewing angles. starting to develop the face. It always starts a little bit crazy looking. I totally recommend learners to work with already modeled faces and just play around with them for a while, because when you try to model a face from square one, it's from scratch, you go through a lot of ugliness and it's quite unmotivating, dispiriting. But I pushed through, I got there. I like to just offset the eyes, have something a little bit less neutral, just to not have a completely boring neutral A pose. I'll just move forward to, this is like the first pass of the character. So from Z-spheres to base mesh, pushing, pulling, finding the proportions, and this gives me, and then I can quickly color it up using polypaint. So there's no UVs, that's just painting directly on a high-res mesh. So here you can see now we've got something to feedback on. I can show this to the client. This was just my own project, but for a character workflow, you'd show this to the client, they could note it up, I can note it up, and then go back into Zbrush to quickly finish it off. This is the final low-res character in Substance Painter. Substance Painter is I've recently moved into it, it's amazing, totally recommend it. And the character was rigged in Mixamo and then had some controllers added to it in Cinema, which is a really easy, quick workflow now. So even if a client came back with changes now, I could easily change the proportions because the rigging, auto rigging that's available speeds up that process. And here's some close-up shots of the fabric texture. There's also a lot less, there's no Photoshop on this pretty much, it's just color corrections. So if the client came back with changes at this stage, we don't have to go back and redo a lot of Photoshop stuff. It's just much more smoother. It ends up being more linear because ironically, because the ZBrush process is non-linear. Here's a very greasy brief I got from someone you might have heard of called Cameron Goff at Dirty Puppet. He's getting a lot of shout outs today. He's very greasy, and he wanted a 80s muscular bodybuilder with butter on his chest or something. Yeah, and he gave me these refs too. I'm like, damn, these guys been ZBrushed. It's just straight away, I'm like, I know how I'm going to pull this off. Inflate. So here's some of the process for this character. I used a base mesh, and that's just a fuse model. And quickly and roughly, start attacking the model. I like to stay fast and loose and then smooth and sculpt. Trying to stay really loose, and I quite like to keep things ugly for a while so I don't get too precious about the mesh. Start building up. This character didn't have to be rigged fully, so that's why he's getting sculpted in a pose. It's great to get rid of that ugly background gradient in ZBrush too. Really helps bring the interface up. Yeah. Yeah, he wanted a cheesy smile. It was a great brief, it was a lot of fun. Using clay tubes, really fast and loose, and then smooth and sculpt. Fast and loose, smooth and sculpt. That's how I do all my work in ZBrush. Cool. And here's the final animation. That's all Cam's delicious animation. The butter's a morph target made in ZBrush. The face is morph target. Really easy to just drop into a pose morph tag. And that is greasy. Greasy. Here's how it looked in Cinema. I had a low-res model in there for Cam to animate with some fast feedback, but that's the high-res you're seeing there. Just some basic deformers. Yeah. Octane for rendering. I love it. Don't talk to me about Redshift. Maybe in a couple of months, actually. Yeah. And here's another character, which was a third workflow, which I'm using all the time on my characters now. It's a blocking workflow popularized by Shane Olsen and some other people in the Zbrush community. So this design is called Vutatulp on Instagram, and I asked him if I could, this character just popped out. I think the weight of his character designs and how they carry themselves, you really get a sense and feeling of this character and how he's feeling, how he's standing. It's quite amazing. I don't have that skill, so I just needed to bring this character into 3D. I start off by identifying the forms in Photoshop, and then blocking it out with really simple primitives in Zbrush. So this is, another technique which I'm trying to keep things pretty ugly for a while. I'm not trying to get finished, and this technique, it helps with that because it focuses you on proportion, rhythm, silhouette, and form, rather than it's so easy to get caught up in details too quickly in Zbrush. But this forces you to get that foundation of the character working, and so anything you put on top of that it's going to be informed by those underlying forms. Here's how it breaks down after the blocking. So the blocks get merged via Dynamesh, and straight away you can see that they create nice seams, and there's not much sculpting that actually had to be done to the character after it had been merged into a Dynamesh. The third image shows how heavy the mesh is, and so that needs to be retopologized. Using the polygroups that were already inherent in that, through the Dynameshing and merging process, you use those polygroups to inform to control the auto retopology, which Zbrush does really well. So that face at the end is auto retopology. There's no hand topology there. It's not quite, perfectly animatable, but it was perfect for my use, and it could do a lot with it. Here's the low and high res. I export the low res to low. I export both of these to Substance Painter and use for baking up maps. And here's the final character in all the Substance Painter glory. That's Cinema 4D here in the end. Just nice big chunky forms from the character design. And I was really happy that I managed to bring those forms into the final character. Here's a bit of the hair process. So I love Cinema 4D's hair, but it's a little bit hard to manage the guides, so instead I created the guides using fiber mesh and Zbrush. And the styling in the top right there, that's all done just using the move brush in Zbrush. You bring it in as a poly mesh at the bottom left there, and then use a plugin to turn that into hair guides, and then that's the final Cinema 4D here with no additional styling. So again, maybe not perfect. I'd like to pull off a couple of specific hair clumps just to add more interest, but this was like a very quick process that gets you 90% of the way there. Cool. Now to the other part of my talk today is about chocolate and splashes. A large part of my work nowadays is food. With advances in GPU rendering, bringing in the subsurface scattering that's available in Octane, makes things like chocolate, milk, ice cream much more possible than it used to be. And also Zbrush is a lot easier to work with than it was 5 years ago. Here's some crazy chocolate machines for a supermarket client. These are like 80% Zbrush, all just working directly in Zbrush, creating the mesh from scratch, and then just a little getting rendered out of Cinema before a little zhushing in Photoshop. These are based on great visuals from designer Peter Cooper at Ignite Motor in Melbourne. Here's a Nestle Milky Bar pack refresh I worked on last year, I think. These are really cool. I love they're printed on some different substrate, and so when you see them in shops now, the the, 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 super stoked with it. They wanted, this was with key branding in Sydney, they wanted dynamism, hyperrealism with lots of flavour cues. And I thought maybe some of these elements would be a bit of a stretch in Zbrush, but in the end, I could get everything working really well. Here's a close-up of the cookie splash, really nice. They want a really thick, gloopy chocolate, which was fabulous for me because the detail ended up holding up really well on the small packs, and it just makes for a more cartoony look, which is more my kind of natural way of being, I think. The octane subsurface scattering really sells this with the specs. They're just basic Cinema 4D spheres, like cloned across underneath the surface of the milk, and then just poking up, breaking the surface in places. Here's some food elements that would have been quite hard to do just a few years ago. The biscotti is a 3D scan, and the almonds are 3D scans as well, through Blink repository. They're really easy to work with. And the cookies and chocolate blocks are all ZBrush. And here is my last bit of work. This was a splash for Kit Kat. So you can see how awesome my sketches are. Really basic. This one I created a base mesh in Cinema just to get the perspective locked off with the camera. Really simple loft nib shape. And I push and pull it. That's the crown, push and pull that into place. Really rough and fast. And then I start drawing on a mask to break off the top of the crown and create the splash shape. So much of ZBrush is drawing in 3D rather than, it's not so much digital sculpting, it's more like drawing in 3D. So my roots as a 2D artist, it just feels really natural to me. And the way you were just working directly on the mesh, it's that sense of control. It makes everything more possible. Dream the impossible dream. Just quickly adding detail. As soon as you get that silhouette down though, it's pretty much a splash already. You just need to start inflating it and glooping it up. Cool, yeah, fun stuff. And then that's a really heavy Dynamesh model, so there's lots of polys there, and I'll just go through a auto retopology process just to bring it down into something more manageable to use in Cinema. Since I moved into Octane, I have to bring all my models down to a more reasonable poly count, but that's really helped with other parts of my workflow, so that's really cool. You can see how clean the topology is, just automatically out of ZBrush using the auto retopology. Yeah, cool. Okay, I'm just going to swap over and show a little bit of actual work in the ZBrush. So when I started with ZBrush, it's much more limited, and you couldn't quite do as much, and so you'd pull out a shape and you get this crazy stretching. To get past that, you'd have to subdivide a couple of times. And if I wanted a gloopy into this tendril to be like a chocolate splash, it starts looking a bit wiggity whack. No good. Crazy stretch polygons. So Dynamesh came along, fixed all that. So as you're working, you're just sculpting, Dynameshing. If something gets a little bit too stretched, just Dynamesh it again. It's a simple keystroke. But what ZBrush has now is Sculptress mode. So you click this button over here, what happens is it makes polygons as you pull out, as you manipulate the mesh, it creates polygons as you go. So it creates this weird triangulated mesh, but you can see there's not many polygons there, but I can inflate that and I don't have to think about topology. And then once I'm happy with it, Maybe I'll shrink this down a little bit for auto topology. Dynamesh it. Just press the remesher. Wait 5 seconds. And we've got a much more workable mesh. You can shrink that down further. And further. And then if you want the additional detail that you had on that high-res mesh, you can just project it onto the low-res mesh. So I'll go project all, and I'll start to bring back that detail. Then I'll put a smoothing, and you've got a splash. I shouldn't be teaching you guys how to do all my splash work, but here's a breakdown for the Milky Bar project. So you got, that's visual, and then you got base mesh that was created in Cinema, you know, roughly lined up with the visual. Just bring in the bottom of the globules, merge it, smooth it. I mean, it's already looking like a splash. Push and pull just to match the start to match the visual. Whoa. Add some ridges for some like more realistic milk details. And you can see this one's got polygroups, so that's these different colors in the mesh. You can use that to drive the auto topology. So if I just make this a little bit, oh no, I can probably do it on this machine. So I'm going to just press this keep groups, and then that'll keep the polygroups where they are as it builds the Z-remesher mesh, which might be a little bit slow. So let's bring down the density of this mesh using Dynamesh. No. And then do Z-remesh. And throughout the job, I'm just constantly changing the topology of the mesh. It's only at the very end, maybe when I've got the final model that's completely approved by the client, that they've seen a half dozen times in Cinema, will I just completely commit to a low-res mesh and UVing. You can UV on the fly too, it's just super fast. And you can see how, I mean, it's a little bit wild, but you can see how the topology has been driven by these polygroups. And that's smoothed out the splash a lot, but you can just, what's this? You can just project the underlying mesh, and all of a sudden, that detail comes in, pull it back a bit, and polish it, maybe not that much, and you've got a splash. Cool. I'll just show this this boolean. The booleans in the latest Cinema 4D are really cool, but I still prefer working with the Zbrush boolean because it's just so fast. So what have we got here? We've got a cookie that was used in the Milky Bar project, and we've got the bite. We're going to use live boolean, and they're intersecting. And now I can work directly on this cookie bite while, where's the cookie bite? There we go. Okay. Oh, sculptress mode, yeah, I don't need that. Okay, yeah, I can work directly on the cookie while it's booleaned. I can see how the bite is going to end up. Change the alpha into something a little bit more bitsy. Add texture, or there's stuff like that. I mean, it's not looking too fab now. But that's how I do all my bite work for cookies. I've been doing a lot of baking recently for virtual baking. it's been interesting trying to achieve sponge cake and burnt sponge cake looks. And I'll just show you a little bit of the painting process. So I like to paint my characters directly in ZBrush because it's so fast and responsive. This guy doesn't have any UVs. That's painted directly on, those colors are painted directly on a mesh. So if I just grab a different alpha, change this color, something red. Whoa. And then turn down the RGB intensity, change the way the brush is working, and let's make this guy a little bit more of a drunkard. Yeah, he's maybe been, you could say he's been drinking for a while, so he's like broken some corpuscles in his face. It's not looking very healthy. Maybe he's had a real hard night. Should I give him a black eye? I don't know. No, okay. So, yeah, maybe that's a bit intense, but a little bit too crazy, so I'll just fill it lightly with some low RGB intensity, and it unifies my crazy spray painting. So, there is no UV maps on this guy at the moment, and I'll just quickly unwrap him. Single click solution. Oh, got to put him down bottom, and now he's got UVs. Now I don't know where these seams are. Let me have a quick look. Jimmy, just 1 second, thanks. And then, oh man, that's not where I want UVs to go. So let's turn this off again and use the poly groups, these things, unwrap, and now those poly groups with the UV islands. I mean, I can play around with those UVs more in ZBrush, but that's pretty much a one-click solution for UVing, so just another awesome thing about ZBrush. So yeah, I hope people who don't know ZBrush didn't mind that talk, but that's about it. So, thanks. I don't know if the pre-drinks before NodeFest is a good idea.
My wife says that every year too. Yeah. But, you know, we've got to bring everyone together. Let's get some questions going quickly. Thank you. You know, Courtney's work is pretty fabulous. I'm so jealous of his mad skills. Anyone got some hot questions? Stick it, Drew.
I would say change the interface. You'll have to watch a bunch of stuff. You're going to have to put a bit of time into it. But as soon as I changed the interface, I lost a lot of friction, became a much easier process.
Change it to what? Just strip it down?
No, what I do is there's a lot of the buttons are hidden within menus. And you're like, oh, how do I do that again? And it just becomes like you looking through menus. It's just not as accessible as Cinema 4D's interface. So as soon as I use a function more than once or twice, it's really easy to learn how to change the interface and just drop a button directly onto the interface, and then your learning will just speed up. There's an amazing...
I'm just going to repeat the question for those up the back. Tutorials for ZBrush.
There's an amazing Melbourne ZBrush artist called Pablo Munez, and he runs a site called ZBrush Guides. That's a perfect place to start. And he probably should have been talking today. But,
I like you though.
Thanks. And yeah, I love watching the ZBrush summits. A really informative video was a video by Point Pusher at a ZBrush summit, and that totally changed my workflow as well. And Shane Olsen, who does the blocking technique, he's got a great tutorial series.
Yep, nice one. How many carrots did you consume?
I'm big on carrots. It's a bit of an addiction. Can cause me pain at times. Don't eat a whole bag every day.
What is it with you and carrots?
It keeps like more sugary goods out of my mouth.
Yeah,
but then it can just go the other way, and that's a bit wild.
Okay.
Keeps the weight off, though,
Each to their own. Kiwis are weird. Anyone else? Come on.
No, yeah, I've never quite shipped myself with ZBrush. I find it the other way around. I find I end up going to ZBrush to fix a lot of mesh issues, and there I have total control and I can fix and do anything I want. I guess I was learning it for a long time before I started using it in commercial work, but that's just part of being a freelancer, is working on learning software while you're not working.
I've dabbled a little bit with it, but I never get time to stay with it, and I have to keep coming back and relearn the little basics. But it is amazing and gorgeous and incredible.
Yeah, well, you don't have to learn it.
time.
You can just give me the work if
Yes,
you want.
yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes, I would prefer to do that.
But yeah, it is fun. I just have the most fun there too.
I'm jealous.
Really
I want to do it. Like, it just looks like so much fun.
Yeah, you can really just get your groove on in there. It's just there's less kind of a gap. You are creating. You've got just total control, and it's awesome.
Total control. More questions? Quick fire.
So he asked about the difference between Sculptress and Dynamesh mode. Sculptress was another software which would do that process really well, and ZBrush bought that software and incorporated its technique, and that's why it's called Sculptress mode. And Sculptress, the difference for me is, the practical difference is that it's triangulated, and it just doesn't look as nice while you're using it, but it enables you to just pull things out really quickly. I will just say Cinema has kind of a similar mode now with the volume mesher in R20, which is kind of interesting. If you don't want to get into ZBrush, you can check it out in Cinema. But Dynamesh is more like just fixing really stretched polygons. I just Dynamesh stuff like every 5 minutes until I get really detailed, and I don't want to lose that detail. Yeah. For ZBrush, yeah, Wacom. For Cinema, mouse. But yeah.
John Dickinson, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a question. Hi, Courtney.
Hello.
The retopology looks great in ZBrush. Anyone who's done it manually can see the difference.
Yes, I know your Twitter or your Instagram.
How's the edge flow with that? Do you actually, once you've retopologized, do you find yourself having to go back and do any manual adjustments?
Yeah, for that superhero female character, that was all auto retopologized, apart from, like, say, crevices around her mouth and crevices around her nose. So that was the parts that I had to do. For larger, maybe hard surface objects, I haven't fully done that, but you definitely have to go around and sharpen up the corners. Right. There are techniques in ZBrush to do that, but that is a bit like black magic to me at the moment. I haven't quite dabbled in the hard surface modeling in ZBrush. But I mean, it gets you 90% of the way there with, a couple of clicks, and then you're just dealing with edge loops most of the time. So I totally recommend checking it out.
And then how do you fix them back in Cinema?
I'm starting to fix things within ZBrush still, but yeah, if you're familiar with Cinema, it's just really easy to use GoZ, which is a script that just bounces your models back and forth between Cinema and ZBrush. So you don't like some mesh, GoZ, fix it in Cinema, GoZ back to ZBrush, and you're sculpting on it again. So yeah.
Right.
That's great.
Can
Thank
you
you.
select and make more edge loops in ZBrush? Or?
Yeah, you can. It's just its sculpting workflow is really hands-on and really quick and obvious. Its hard surface stuff is a little bit more elaborate, so that is not what I like to do in ZBrush. Yeah, but it's very powerful.
Yeah, nice one. More questions?
He asked about approach to lighting of product shots and 3D lighting in general, I guess. I guess the answer for that, I had to say, is Octane, because immediately lights start looking good. I have just a lighting rig set up in my presets that I drag onto all my projects, so it's very quick to set up, but maybe some of my lighting is a little bit samey. In general, I've got the key lights, and then I try to find I use rim lights to pull out details and pull the object out from the background, and then maybe start looking at mood through color.
Do you render things out in passes, layers, and then composite them back together?
Not since Octane. It's a bit more brute force.
Right.
So I just use the RGBA, the main hero output, and then just zhoosh it using using selection layers.
And because you can get away with everything looks great pretty much straight out of these GPU renderers. Redshift is better.
And it's just, I'm able to output so much more stuff with Octane now compared to when I used to use V-Ray. So I just, I'll rave about it until it completely screws me. But,
okay, one more question. How much work comes from the collective, and how did that start?
Watermark Creative started like 28 years ago. I joined them about 15 years ago. All my work comes through Watermark. Oh, maybe not all my work. I'd say 90% of my work comes through Watermark. The other 10% is like personal contacts within Melbourne, but it all ends up going through Watermark. So any work I do gets billed and Watermark takes a commission. That's because they give me 90% of my work. And that's from contacts they've made through being around for 28 years in Auckland and Sydney. So yeah, it's that.
Courtney will be available at the after party for carrots and more questions. Please thank Courtney Hopkinson.